All right, we're gonna start. All right. So, the Bitcoin revolution. The revolution will be televised. Eric Kim. Right. So, starting off, what is Bitcoin? Why does it matter? So, I think the first important critical thing is trying to consider and think, what is Bitcoin? We've all heard about it in the news. We heard about Bitcoin as being a Ponzi scheme, a pyramid scheme. And honestly, my mom has gone through her fair share of Ponzi schemes. Like she got suckered by the whole Amway scam. And I think the reason why Bitcoin is so important and critical is I essentially see at this point, Bitcoin is like the early days of the internet. So if you go into a time machine and you could tell somebody in the past, okay, in the days before email existed, right? So, okay, once one day, everyone's gonna have a supercomputer in their pocket. They're gonna use it to check all their bank statements. You're gonna be able to use your camera on your phone to scan your checks, uh, your bank account balances. You can use this to send money and messages and videos to everyone on the planet instantly. Everyone would have thought you were crazy. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Bitcoin, so I think also a constructive way to start thinking about Bitcoin is trying to figure out what Bitcoin is not. So my personal opinion is I do not think that Bitcoin is actually cryptocurrency. I think currency is the US dollar. And I think one of the biggest problems about the whole field of crypto and cryptocurrency is everyone is like a crypto anarchist, which means that they want to see the US government and all the governments on the planet fail, and they could essentially live in peace and silence without interference from the government. Yet, obviously at the end of the day, it's nice to have public streets. It's nice to not get robbed in the streets. And actually, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Bitcoin is people think that Bitcoin is trying to replace the US dollar, but my personal thought is Bitcoin is going to be a supplement to the US dollar. Essentially, I thought this a long time ago that essentially Bitcoin is digital gold to hedge against inflation, which means as our money, our US dollars or our euros or our local currencies become devalued, the upside is our Bitcoin will become more valuable. I think the best analogy that I got was from chairman of MicroStrategy, MSTR, Michael Saylor, essentially thinking that Bitcoin is not digital currency, but digital real estate. So I think this analogy is better because nobody's on, their Zillow, 20 times a day checking their home prices, right? And this is my Mad Max post-apocalyptic perspective is that, okay, so imagine the future where there's, essentially uh, there's this like nuclear fallout and, there's no inhabitable places anywhere. And let us say there's only 21 million single family homes left on the planet for anybody to live. Obviously, sooner or later, people are going to want somewhere to live. And so I think the best analogy, I think, is Bitcoin as digital real estate, which means that with digital real estate, a lot of people are like, yeah, I want to quickly make money off of Bitcoin, but how do I make money off of it? It's kind of like the early days of real estate. So if you bought Manhattan in the 1600s, how do you cool monetize it? And I still think that we're in the very, very early days of Bitcoin and institutional adoption, which means you're going to start to see new Bitcoin products come out. So some simple thoughts. So we've all heard stories of Scumbag, San Francisco-based um, uh, whatchamacallit, scumbag landlords, charging an arm and a leg for their tenants, and we all hate the landlords. I think with Bitcoin, we'll become the new digital landlords, which means effectively we will in the future be able to like rent out our Bitcoin. And um, let's say we have one Bitcoin, right? And then I think that the personal math I like to do in my head is thinking that one Bitcoin is equivalent to one single family home. So currently live in Los Angeles in Culver City. It's kind of insane. A single family home. I've even seen some in my neighborhood for $4.4 million. The average median household single family home is around $1.7 million. So in my personal mind, where I think Bitcoin is a trillion times more valuable than physical real estate and land because you could always make more of it. It's not a real scarcity. What that then means is, I think in my mind, the price of a single family home and the price of a Bitcoin should be pegged to one another. So in my mind, I still think of a Bitcoin at least 1.1, 1.7, 2.1, maybe even $4.4 million a coin. And I think this is a very it's a very fascinating idea because also people say, oh, but Bitcoin's not real money. Is it? Yeah, but like are dead shiny rocks, aka gold money either? Or is fiat currency, pieces of paper? You can't eat pieces of paper to live. And I think one of the most interesting things I learned about the philosophy of money is that essentially all money is just exists in the value of men, and it is all essentially subjective. Now, what makes Bitcoin so fascinating to me is that it's the first time in human existence, all 100 trillion years we've been existing or whatever, is that you had a hard cap supply of money. So, for example, people often talk about gold, right? So the issue with gold is at the time, it was the least bad form of money because it was very, very scarce. It was difficult to find, it's difficult to mine, transport. Yet there was lots of good properties of gold. It's essentially it kind of lasts forever. Um, Aesthetically, it looks beautiful. The nice yellow color of gold mimics that of the sun. And at least back in the day, let's say you had gold coins, it could easily fit in your front pocket, whatever. But now things become a lot more difficult because we're living in the 21st century, the 22nd century and beyond. We already have flying car, drone, robo taxi, self-driving car, Waymos. It's like, why are we still using an antiquated digital framework of modern day banking, Swift code accounts? If you've ever tried to send money, from the Netherlands to South Korea to Nigeria to Lagos, whatever, you find that the whole Swift system is kind of like a bunch of gangster mafiosos. Like even my mom is currently living in South Korea. And if I would just need to send her like any sort of small amount of monies, right? It's like crazy. It's like, why does it take 3 or 4 days? Cost like me $55. And it's like this should be done instantly. So I think it's a big revolution. So why does Bitcoin matter? It's kind of like asking somebody, why does clean water matter? So one of the things I love about Michael Saylor, and I highly recommend watching all of his videos. Saylor, um, it's essentially Twitter or X at Saylor or Michael.com. And he uses this analogy of sewer water. So let us say all 8 billion people on the planet are all drinking sewer water and people are dying of dysentery. And people are saying, I don't get it. I exercise, you know, I eat healthy, I exercise every day, but I'm still dying of dysentery. My kids are dying of dysentery. And so the whole issue is that if you're drinking sewer water, no matter how healthy your lifestyle is, how virtuous you is, it don't matter. You're going to be, dying of dysentery or perpetually sick. And so if we think about these physiological terms and apply it to Bitcoin and money and digital capital, this becomes really fascinating because my personal thought, and also I grew up in a family of poverty meaning that I thought I was going to be homeless at least 2 or 3 times. Dad perpetually addicted to gambling with away the rent monies. And so the whole ethos I had as a kid ever since I was 15 is okay, I'm gonna take every single penny I can, immediately go out, buy some new sneakers, buy some cool clothes. And I literally had $0 in my bank account. And so I think the pernicious, vicious cycle of inflation is you cannot blame people for not saving up capital for their future if the money itself is deflating at such a rapid pace. And so I personally think that, Bitcoin is like giving every single person on the planet like unlimited free Fiji water or the best alkaline hipster, whatever water you want, essentially giving people clean water. And a lot of people say, yeah, but Bitcoin is not real money. It's like, okay, so I think this is a big shift for me also personally. My personal thought is Bitcoin is actually more important than like, okay, so my personal thought, these are all just my personal thoughts, right? So we should not think about money. We should think about capital. I think capital is a lot more robust and strong as a concept. So, for example, capital comes from cap, like upon your head, kap. Essentially, it came from the head of oxen. So, if you read the Iliad, the Odyssey, essentially every time you want to appease the gods, you have to sacrifice a hectocomb. Hecta means 100, 100 head of oxen to appease the gods. And obviously that's very expensive. Like, can you imagine if you sacrifice 100 Lamborghinis to appease the gods, it would be quite the expensive endeavor, right? And so, capital, we all live under capitalism. It doesn't matter if you're living in Europe, Africa, Asia, America, China. And also, one thing that people don't understand is I think what a lot of these people, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, oh, China's going to take over. It's like China's not going to take over. It's like China is dependent on America, and effectively, the Chinese yuan, the CNY, is essentially effectively pegged to the US dollar. And the US is essentially the world reserve currency. And capital is what we seek, not money. Money, you use money like, you know, I'll get into this a little detail a little bit further, but talking about currency. So currency is like, buying a Starbucks Frappuccino or buying a In-N-Out burger, right? That's like money currency, right? Capital is essentially long-term store of value. So it's building generational wealth. So one of my favorite songs from Kanye West is the Off the Grid song. It's like, we off the grid, grid, grid. This for my kids, for when my kids have kids. And I think this is also the big thing is a lot of millennials nowadays. I think the disincentive to have kids is people, there's so much fear mongering about the future is going to become, boil the seas or whatever. So there's not going to be a future. So essentially, there's a strong sense of pessimism. But Bitcoin to me is like solidified optimism, which means that the future is going to be glorious and great. And even having Seneca right now, think about his future kids, or my future kids, it brings me so much joy because the simple strategy is you just keep stacking Bitcoin until you die, and then you hand it on to your kids give it to their kids. It's like if you owned, 100 penthouses or 10 square blocks or 20 square blocks in Manhattan on the main island. Do you ever sell that to buy a Lamborghini? No, that's not what one does. Or liquefy it all into US dollars and brag about how many billions of dollars you have in your bank account. Nope, that's not the goal. You want to build capital. And traditionally, it's been real estate. But once again, real estate was a good idea in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, 2000s. The subprime mortgage meltdown proved that, maybe it's not always the best idea. And I think the hard thing is people say, yeah, but, real estate, essentially everyone needs somewhere to live. And historically, the value of real estate is always going to go up forever. Now, people say that, the tricky thing is the pace of monetary inflation is around 15%. The best thing is to either chat GPT or Google the M2 money supplies. And essentially what you will find is the M2 money supply is essentially a metric in which the US government or any other government on the planet, include the euro and stuff, they keep printing more currency. And the reason why then this becomes an issue is that you have more currency in the system. That means that individual value of each unit is going to go down. And actually, the thing that I called I call this the In-N-Out burger, not the In-N-Out burger, uh, the Shake Shack burger incident. So me and Seneca, we used to always buy a single burger patty for $1.50. One day we pop up, they say it's $2.50 a burger patty. And we're like, wait, what? This makes no sense. It's like, yeah, we just increased the minimum wage to $20 an hour, increase the wage to $20 an hour for fast food. And the hard thing is with minimum wage, you cannot rewind the hands of time. If you suddenly said that the minimum wage is only $17 an hour, there will be riots. The streets would not be good. So we're all photographers, street photographers, whatever. And the hard thing with digital is in our minds, digital is infinite and free. So for example, I could take a copy of Mozart's Fifth Symphony or whatever as an MP3 file, and I could copy and distribute it a trillion times with zero marginal cost to me, right? And so this is where the notion of cyber becomes more interesting. And all think about like, cyberpunk, thinking about cybertruck. Um, it's essentially, once again, mathematically, cryptographically, the hard science and the hard math is there can never be more than 121 million coins in existence, comma, forever. Even if you took all the quantum ultra computers on the planet, times it by 20, you still could not produce more Bitcoins. It's just not how it works, right? And so I think there's different ways you can think about it, right? So you could think about like I also could another fun analogy I think about is that let's say one Bitcoin is like one cyber oxen. It's immortal, indestructible. It'll give you life forever, right? and there's only going to be 21 millions of them in the futures and now. And so this is your chance to get one for an extreme discount. Even if I could tell you, right? So once again, the single family home analogy. Let's say you want to buy a single family home. Let's say it costs €1 million or whatever, right? So if I could tell you today that you could buy a single family home for only $100,000 or €100,000, you'd be like, wow, that's the deal of a century. That's You're still getting a 90% discount. And my personal thought is Bitcoin is far more valuable than digital real estate because in the next 20, 30 years, when essentially all the baby boomers, the Gen Xers die off, and it's the millennials and Gen Zs and alphas that take over. Everyone's going to not really care about physical real estate no more. It'll be digital cyber real estate, which is Bitcoin. So my personal story, how did I get into Bitcoin? So it might seem a little bit random. It's like, okay, Eric, you're super famous for photography, street photography. Like, how do you get into Bitcoin? Like, that's like so random, right? But actually, it's not very random at all because, if you've been following me carefully, the whole time I've always been talking about living minimalistically, frugally, Spartan lifestyle, whatever's. And now that I I'm pretty stacked with Bitcoin and MicroStrategy stock, MSTR. Funny enough, I personally found that my lifestyle habits haven't changed much. I mean, I'm a little bit more generous, maybe. Like, took out a friend last night to all you eat Korean barbecued. Um, Paid for her bill, didn't really even flinch. And so my personal thought with Bitcoin is I personally wanted monetary freedom. And so long story short, uh, so I'll never forget this moment. So I'm born 1988, went to UC as undergrad. My roommate at the time, Kevin, it's our junior year. He was on Reddit. And I'll never forget. We're in our studio apartment. And I think I was distracted. I was doing something else. He was like, Eric, he's on some subreddit and he's like, oh, Eric, there's this thing called Bitcoin. And a dude just bought a Bitcoin, like about two Domino's pizzas for like 10,000 Bitcoins. We should just get like $100 worth of it and just see what happens. I'm like, nah, it sounds like a scam. Didn't disregarded it. And I did the maths now. If me and Kevin and my roommate Kevin just bought 100 Bitcoins at the time for funsies, right? And I had $100, right? We would each be worth at least $1.2 billion today. I'm like, man, this was like the worst mistake of my life, right? But everything that's happened is it should have happened. Maybe if I had become a billionaire, I'd just become some degenerate, cocaine addict on some beach somewhere in Hawaii. And then Seneca would have never been born. I would have never done my photography, world travels, whatever. And my then next reintroduction to Bitcoin was kind of more recently when moving to LA, the cost of living is so expensive. And I don't know a single person who doesn't want financial freedom. Long story short, I first heard about Bitcoin again kind of earlier than when I was living in Vietnam around 2017, 2018. And at the time, I didn't really need Bitcoin because our living expenses were so cheap. It was $320 a month for a brand new studio apartment, fully furnished, uplighting, and the jazz, right? And even at the time, passively, the income we're making, let's say it's $1,000, $2,000 a month. Let's say it's not even that much, right? But like our whole total expenses, living expenses was like maybe $600-700 a month. So I had the epiphany. I'm like, I'm never gonna run out of money. So already at the age of 26, in my mind, I mentally retired, right? And just more for funsies, I met this guy named Bing in Singapore. Heard about this thing called Digibyte, DGB. I don't even think they're around anymore. But at the time, I'm like, okay, I want to buy some Bitcoins, buy some Digibyte. How do I do this? And at the time, Coinbase seemed like the best option because it was the simplest, most minimalistic. To me, it looked like the PayPal for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. I'm like, this is cool. Bought about $25,000 worth of Bitcoin, which and Bitcoin was only about $7,000, $6,999 dollars a Bitcoin, so 7K. So I bought about what 3.5 Bitcoins at the time, for $25,000. Put some of that into Digibyte, held a Bitcoin or two, and essentially saw the waves and the crashes and the Doge coins and stuff like that. And essentially, I just kind of woke up to my guts and found out that Bitcoin was a real deal. Um, I think I think also some strange analogies is to me Bitcoin is almost like a new world economic religion. I mean, people who follow Bitcoin are like fanatic, they're zealous about it. They follow Michael Saylor like his the prophet the next prophet of Bitcoin, right? And it's always good to invest in religions, right? To invest in religions, to invest in cults like the cult of Tesla, Elon Musk, Apple, Steve Jobs, whatevs, right? So essentially, and then more now, like, obviously I have financial independence now. And the only reason I'm teaching this workshop or sharing this information is I almost feel like it's my ethical imperative. Like, once again, if you could have discovered internet in the early days or clean drinking water, I would feel that it would almost be a disservice if I did not share this information with others. So everyone's always about like, okay, so what is the Bitcoin going to be worth? So there's the open source model. Michael Saylor, I think, helped create it. It's called the Bitcoin 21 model, I think, right? So 21 years from now, his base case is that Bitcoin's going to be 13 million a Bitcoin, bear case 3 million a Bitcoin. The bull case is 49 million a Bitcoin. And no, this was in 2024 in July before Trump was announced as president. And he is ultra super pro crypto and Bitcoin. And also worth following is his son, Eric Trump. Ironically, his name is also Eric. Also, the funny thing, there's a bunch of Erics actually in the world of Bitcoin. Eric Kim, Eric Semler of Semler Scientific, this other ETF guy who works for Bloomberg. His name is Eric Balkanas or something like that, and Eric Trump. And essentially, we have an all Republican Trump pro Bitcoin pro crypto president and cabinet, whatever, right? And so these were all written by Michael Saylor's predictions before we had the most pro Bitcoin government of all time. So all these numbers I think should be inflated. So my personal thought is I think for the next 4 years, once Trump takes office, January 20th, 2025, I think this will be the craziest, best Bitcoin bull run of all time in the next 4 years. So currently, Bitcoin's been going up around 60% to 62% ARR, annual rate of return. Um, and I think once Trump takes office, and I'm pretty sure he's going to buy the million Bitcoins or whatever for the strategic American Reserve. And also, I think Eric Trump, his son, is committed to having Bitcoin be at least a million in Bitcoin. So let's see. So my personal prediction, right? So I think Bitcoin will grow by at least 120% ARR over the next 4 years. So let's say Bitcoin is worth around $100,000 right now. So by next year, let's say it's 250,000. The year after that, let's say it's 750,000. Let's say the year after that, it's like 1.2 million. So I think we're on track to hit a million of Bitcoin in 4 years, about 10x gain. So just do the math from then. Now, people are always asking, okay, this, Bitcoin reserve strategy, like how is and why is America going to buy the Bitcoins, right? So we're essentially out of physical land and real estate. Now we have to go to cyberspace, right? And it seems kind of silly, like something out of a sci-fi film. But the truth is, the war we're having with China and Russia, it's not physical war per se. It's actually cyber war. So cybersecurity is the big, big moneymaker, even cyber penetration testing, right? I think Gmail is trying to get like all these malicious actors tried to attack the Gmail servers like a million times a minute, something crazy, right? And if you look at the history of America, right? So Manhattan, 1926, the price of Manhattan, it was essentially stolen from the natives, right? 60 guilders, right? Louisiana Purchase, to fund Napoleon. California also kind of stolen from the local Mexicans, right? And also Alaska, right? The payoff was great, right? And so essentially the Bitcoin Act, the Cynthia Lummis bill, she's trying to get the states to buy at least a million Bitcoins, right? And, even Michael Saylor is much more aggressive. He's like, no, America should at least purchase maybe 5 or 6 million Bitcoins, which is 20 to 25% of the whole Bitcoin supply. And all America has to do, it's a free trade. They just need to sell their gold and then buy Bitcoin. And in a recent interview that I was listening from Saylor, super fascinating, is like essentially what he said was the super evil genius strategy of selling America selling her gold reserves and buying Bitcoin is that if that's the case, comma, we demonetize our enemies, you know, capital reserves. So then suddenly the gold of the Russians, the Chinese will go to zero, and then everyone's going to rush into Bitcoin. And if America owns Bitcoin, it's a good sign for the future. And also another big thing I want to talk about: why does America have the best economy on the planet? So we essentially gave birth to Apple, Amazon, Facebook, the magnificent seven stocks, Netflix. And people talk about China. It's like, okay, I don't know a single rich mainland Chinese oligarch who doesn't want to send their kids to the States to Harvard or Yale or Princeton, buy a nice house in Palo Alto, the Bay Area, or even Vancouver. no rich mainland Chinese person actually wants to be in China, but because of capital controls, they're kind of stuck. So once there's going to be a mad rush to Bitcoin, that means that you, your family, your whole squad is going to prosper. Now, issues. My friend Dante had a question about storage. So I think the hard thing with storage is okay. So how do you say this? This is my personal philosophy. The reason I do not personally trust cold storage for myself or more of these self custody options is that I know that I am very forgetful. And my biggest fear is, let's say I forget my passcode or whatever's right to the Bitcoins. And, or let's say my kids gonna forget it, right? Then boom, like you're gonna be out like $100 million, right? So that's not fun, right? And so personally, I think the easiest is to just store it on the cloud. So using a trusted custodian, whether it be Coinbase, I think Fidelity has their own services now. And the honestly, it seems that like Coinbase is probably the best option, coinbase.com, or you just download to your iPhone, iPad, whatever, right? Is that you could also get a link with your biometric Apple ID data, whether it be Face ID or thumbprint, whatever, right? So this way it just feels much more secure. So for me, I would prefer an 80 to 85% optimal thing that is kind of dummy proof rather than take the 100% secure option, which because you use your arrow, I might fail. And something that I've personally learned is in terms of technology and all these things in between, seeking the simplest, most straightforward option that is least complicated is often the best solution. And the reason I would be very, very wary of a lot of these people promoting, buying their hardware wallets, whatever's right. Everyone has a buck to make, everyone has a Bitcoin to make, everyone wants to make a few Satoshis here and there. And so they're trying to fear monger you that, oh, you're gonna, Coinbase is gonna get hacked. And I'm like, nah, I don't think it is. It's like, it's like essentially a US government, you know, essentially it's traded on the stock exchange. It's a American based company. I would not trust anything outside of the States. But yeah, I would say choose. Now, obviously, if you're super, quant genius, autistic genius, then do all the cold storage stuff. But if in doubt, just the simplest thing is just Coinbase seems to be the best. Okay, so this is kind of my free money hack. So I call this the MicroStrategy strategy, MSTR MicroStrategy versus Bitcoin. And okay, so it's very, very simple. So this becomes a philosophical debate. To say it short, I think the ultimate goal is to own Bitcoin. He or she or the entities with the owns of the most Bitcoin shall win. And so for me, philosophically, let us say that you could own, 20 Bitcoins, or you could own $2 million worth of MicroStrategy MSTR stock, right? 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? You're gonna actually outperform, you're actually gonna make more money from MicroStrategy stock than Bitcoin. So Bitcoin historically has been 60% to 62% ARR annual rate of return. MicroStrategy is almost double that, 120 to 125 ARR. So if you actually want to maximize your returns, you just buy MicroStrategy stock, MSTR and Bitcoin, right? But the issues is, let us say that Michael Saylor gets shot, he gets killed, he dies in a Cybertruck, whatever, right? Then it's probably not going to be the world's best future for MicroStrategy. So it's actually much more risky. So if you want the least risky option, it's just put all your money into Bitcoin, right? And some millennial living strategies, right? So the simplest strategy I have, I call it the Spartan strategy. This is what I personally follow is you essentially try to live as minimally and frugally and sparse as you can, and just put literally 90% of your income into Bitcoins, right? And a free money hack I discovered. So, for example, let's say you have $150,000 or 150,000 euros, right? And I'm not 100% sure how it works if you're a European, what is, right? But you buy MicroStrategy stocks. So let's say you buy 100,000 or $150,000 worth of it, right? And MSTR, and you use Fidelity or Robinhood or whatever trading app you have, right? And the strategy is simple. It's whenever let us say the base case is 150,000. Let's say your MicroStrategy stock value then goes up to 200,000, right? You sell $50,000 worth of it, and then you just transfer that to your bank account, and then your bank account is linked with your Coinbase account, and then you just buy the Bitcoin, right? And rinse and repeat. So very, very impressive over the last 3 months. I started with initial seed capital of around $150,000 in MicroStrategy stock. off of that $150,000, right? And I haven't even touched my principal. I yielded $242,000 off of that initial 150,000, right? And also for traditional Roth IRA, retirement accounts, I put everything into MicroStrategy stock, and it is already like 3x. Like for example, um, my Roth IRA just kind of randomly was like what $78,000, and in the course of 3 months, it's like now it's like 230,000. It peaked at around 300,000, so it's going to be a good future. And so the very simple strategy. So let us say you're able to get down your living expenses to, let's say, 5,000 bucks a month or 5,000 euros a month, right? Um, the point isn't to just make a bunch of money and just go out and buy the Lambo. The goal is actually to continue to live frugally. If anything, live more frugally. People who says like, oh, you want to get rich, don't care about money or whatever. If you're a real greedy, money loving person, actually the optimal strategy is you continue driving your old Toyota Prius and you just pour all of your money in Bitcoin, because really the truth is, and this is my philosophical thought, is there's almost nothing worth on the planet purchasing besides Bitcoin, is my philosophical thought. So, and also some even more super smart economic leverage, right? So instead of paying an arm and a leg for a rent in LA or New York, Brooklyn, you just move to like Southeast Asia, right? You go move to Southeast Asia, live like a king for like 300, 500 bucks a month, right? You just put all your money into Bitcoins, right? So even if you had a modest savings, right? Let's say you had like $200,000 and you had MicroStrategy stock. Let's say every month the month is rent is due and the expenses are due, right? You just sell a small portion of that stock and it's going to go up, you know, so my thought on the next 4 years of MicroStrategy, assuming it's around 2x Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin's going to go up 120% ARR. I think MicroStrategy is going to double that, 240% ARR. So just do the math. Is that at the end of every single month, you make a small, your gains go up like crazy, right? And let's say your living expenses are like, I don't know, $1,000, or if you live in the States, $5,000, you sell X amount of monies to just support your living expenses, and you just continue to ride your gains. But ultimately, my personal thought is whatever excess money and capital you have, just put it all into Bitcoin. So the MicroStrategy then ends up becoming the engine or the turbocharger or the cash cow. You milk it and you shave the cream off the top, and then you buy Bitcoin with it. So I think the reason why, to me, Bitcoin is such a fascinating thing and very exciting is essentially Bitcoin is digital photography. Peter Diamandis, the ex guy, right? He talks a lot about Kodak, film, the iPhone and disruption. So actually, intuitively, as photographers, digital photographers, we should actually understand, this disruptive power about digital photography. So obviously, you have the hipsters with their mustaches and their flannels, talking about the virtues of film photography. But the truth is, digital photography is like a quadrillion times better. And also currently in the year 2025, incoming, digital photography is actually superior to film photography. I mean, maybe in the early days of digital photography sucked, right? But now at this point, digital photography is far superior to any sort of film photography. And the only reason you shoot film in today's world is either as like a practice to appreciate the joys of photography, so the philosophical approach, or you're trying to be some sort of like snobby fine art photographer and overcharge money for your photos, then you shoot film. Because honestly, the fine art market, they're always going to overvalue film photos over digital photos because it's more complicated, it's more strange, right? So in the art world, the more complicated, abstruse, and complicated you can make your art, the better. But for us, we care about practical things. Yeah, think about Bitcoin. So think about the iPhone Pro versus your mom's Kodak Browning camera. I think the thought is obvious. Okay. So how to start buying Bitcoin? Very simple. Just download the Coinbase app, or you know, um, if you don't want to actually own Bitcoin, you just want to make a ton of money, just buy MicroStrategy stock, MSTR, and use your traditional accounts. And I still think that this is the biggest thing, is that everyone wants to become a millionaire, right? But you know, what I think people want to do is they don't want to earn, like, okay, people want to spend $1 million. They don't want to actually save and build $1 million, right? And so if you think about money and capital, digital capital, think about like Lego bricks, right? I just went to Legoland with Seneca, it was great. So let us say that each Bitcoin or dollar or $1 million, like these, let's say these are Lego bricks, right? The goal is you want to build your Lego tower brick thing as tall as possible. You don't ever want to get rid of your bricks and throw into the trash. That's essentially what consumerism is. And this is actually another big philosophical thing I discovered is what's the difference between capitalism and consumerism? Consumerism is actually the exact opposite of capitalism. Capitalism is about accumulating wealth, building your capital and not spend it, right? Even one of my favorite Kanye quotes is like, it's like, why people make money, don't spend it, but I'd rather buy 80 gold chains, go ignorant, right? Ignorant. And so the pernicious thing that happens in a lot of communities, especially poor communities, right? I've seen this happen with my own eyes, right? It happens to Korean people. It happens to everybody, right? Is that, you live in a crappy apartment in K-Town with 20 other dudes, yet you drive the brand new BMW and you're not building any sort of generational wealth, right? And so essentially, yeah, you want to build the capital and not spend it. And essentially, you want to start to intelligently leverage your capital to give to your future kids or your descendants or whatever you want to do. Now, the hardest thing about Bitcoin is stomaching the volatility. So volatile means just it goes up, it goes down, and then like honestly, for most people, it's going to give them like 100 heart attacks over, right? Now, I think of Bitcoin kind of like nuclear energy. So nuclear energy in the untamed form is obviously toxic, could cause the next Fukushima, whatever, right? But if you have a bunch of smart people, engineers, nuclear physicists working in a controlled manner, right? It's like the greatest benefit to society because to humanity, because essentially you're giving people free electricity forever, right? And I think my personal thought is the volatility is a feature, not a bug. So the reason why Bitcoin goes up and down and sideways so much all the time, and you can have huge swings, is because you could trade it 24/7, 365 on the weekends, in the evenings, right? It still befuddles me that in the year 2024, 2025, it's like, why is it that, after 5 p.m., Eastern time or on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, like, why did they close the markets? Like, what if there's another Cuban Missile Crisis? It makes no sense, right? And also, the reason why it's so volatile is that it's actually the most desirable commodity on the planet. And there's all these people with these weird Bloomberg machine terminals, whatever. They are always pegging everything to the Bitcoin. So a lot of people ask about Ethereum, Dogecoin, whatever, right? I think Bitcoin is the only true. Everything else is the false profits. Everything else is the false coins. The immaculate conception of Bitcoin and Satoshi. I think this is actually a big deal because anything that is not Bitcoin, Ethereum, Vitalik, and the like, they need some sort of spokesperson or individual to prop up the value, right? Whereas Satoshi, he invented it, he disappeared forever. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is that every other crypto thing, which is not Bitcoin, it does not have a hard cap. Like you could print more Ethereums, you could print more whatever tokens. You cannot print more Bitcoins, and that's the big thought. So volatility is vitality. Eric Kim. I actually didn't say that. Sorry, that was actually Michael Saylor. I typed that in wrong. But essentially, volatility is vitality, and the more volatile, the more energy, the power you have, the more vitality you have. So once again, people think of volatility as being risk. That is actually not the case. Bitcoin is going to go up forever, but it's going to be like an extreme roller coaster. It's going to go up, down, right? But with extreme swings, it's extreme performance. So, um, yeah, volatility is not risk. Volatility is just going up and down a lot, but essentially over a long enough time span, it's going to go up forever. So I borrowed a lot of slides quite liberally from Michael Saylor. Some of these are from his recent Microsoft pitch. And yeah, just go michael.com, go to his presentations, look at it yourself. So I'll just make some quick points. So essentially, currently, Bitcoin is like a $2 trillion asset class, right? And this is also from Jesse Myers, onceinaSpecies.com. And the reason why this is important is currently, let us say the whole world's economy is $900 trillion, right? And what we have our eyes on is real estate. So real estate is, most people don't really just use real estate as a place to live, right? Otherwise, you just rent. People use it for a long-term store of value. So for example, if you're a really, really rich family from New York City, you own like 10 square blocks in Manhattan, And does your descendants sell, you know, a square block to buy himself a few Ferraris? No, that would be a bad strategy. So the tip I have for any single person trying to build intergenerational wealth, keep it simple. Only one rule: you don't sell the Bitcoin. If you face extreme poverty or financial distress, I don't know, become an Uber driver or something, pay the bills, but don't sell the Bitcoin. And currently, I think what we're going to see is Bitcoin is just going to take over the gold market, which is $16 trillion. Maybe the cars and collectible art market. Now, a big thought is this is from Michael Saylor once again, is that all these assets on the planet, half of it is to provide utility, right? So, for example, you know, uh, let's say you need somewhere to live, right? No, so that provides utility, right? But then again, some of it is to preserve capital, right? And as a 36-year-old millennial, nowadays the pressure is, oh, you got to buy a single family home, right? But the reason I get so sus of people saying you should buy a house is that they're like, oh, you essentially need somewhere to live, you got a bit of capital, blah, blah, right? You don't want to give money to land. But it's like, no, you only need one reason. Like, you would only ever buy a single family house if, let's say, you really like having a backyard and a garage or what else, right? But it's really not a money making thing because home ownership is like a trillion times more expensive than you would otherwise think. And as a consequence, with a single family home, even if the price is going up, right? At best, you might be breaking even, if not, slowly bleeding yourself because let's say real estate is on average going up 10% a year, right? The money supply, the inflationary M2 supply is 15% a year. So you're actually kind of losing money. So the big thought is once again, you know, the optimistic thought is eventually all these long-term sort of things are going to become digital capital. I still think about this. The Warren Buffett, they're all going to die, and then when we, take the mantle, what's going to happen in the next 20 years? Even if you're 80 years old right now, 81 years old, shout out. I don't know. I think I'm optimistic. We could live to be 100, 120. So yeah, this is definitely the next wave you're not going to want to miss, right? And currently a lot of millennials, people like everyone wants to buy the Lambo or the Ferrari. You're going to lose the value of it in about 3 years. You want to live forever. So these are some kind of conservative growth estimates according to Michael Saylor's Bitcoin 24 model. So in about 21 years, and this was still pretty conservative, right? Bitcoin is going to become a $280 trillion, thing, right? So going from 2 trillion to 200 trillion, so at least 10x. So you're conservatively, you're going to see your money at least 10x in 21 years, which is pretty cool, right? It's not going to take over all these other things. It might, but it might not. Now, people always ask, what is Bitcoin backed by? So I did the maths, right? And based on what other people say too, essentially the Bitcoin network, if you took all the Apple, Amazon, AWS servers, Meta, combine them all times 20, you could still not hack the Bitcoin network. And in terms of the raw power that goes into powering, think about like 20 nuclear power reactors powering the thing, right? And also, people don't understand is there's already been $850 billion of quote, quote real money invested in thing. Follow BlackRock, they just recently recommended most of their you know owners to allocate at least 2% of their portfolio into Bitcoin, which is kind of a big deal. Look about what Larry Fink says. BlackRock is like what they own, what $40 trillion of assets around the planet. They're kind of a big deal. And also it's a network effect. So you remember in the early days of Facebook, it was only university students with a .edu address were allowed to join in. Then they opened up to everybody. And the network effect of Facebook is that um, if you have Facebook and I have Facebook, then Facebook instantly becomes more valuable to both of us because I can now share my photos with you, whatever, right? But then if your friends also have Facebook, it becomes much more valuable to everything. Same thing goes with FaceTime, right? The reason why I used to be a diehard Android dude. Now I'm like all iCloud, everything. It makes life so much easier. You get your mom an iPhone, now you get FaceTime, iMessage. It makes life way better. And so Bitcoin's going to be the same thing as more and more people are going to continue to download Coinbase or whatever. And also my optimistic thought is if Apple doesn't want to become irrelevant, I'm very certain in the next 5 to 10 years, Apple is going to have their own Bitcoin storage thing in your iCloud account. It makes sense, right? They have Apple Pay, they have the Apple Wallet. Essentially, Apple is the new bank. And so now when they do like a 3 device authentication for your Bitcoins through your iPhone, your iPad, and your MacBook Pro, whatevs, it might actually be one of the most safe ways to store your Bitcoins. Um, Also, things to think about if you're a traditional investor. So there's this notion called the cost to capital that Michael Saylor says a lot. I might be getting this wrong, but essentially the S&P 500, right? Um, on average is like 14 to 15% return year over year, right? So if you're not making at least 15% or over 15% a year, you're essentially losing your bleeding money. So real estate, gold, bonds is kind of a losing bet, right? And so the Magnificent Seven, which all the big tech stocks, 28%, a little bit better, right? But look at Bitcoin, it's like 62% year over year. And it's kind of the obvious bet, right? And even if you think about, everyone's talking about Nvidia, Tesla, what else, right? I think the reason why the mainstream media they don't like to talk about MicroStrategy is that it's still a little bit too weird and bizarre. And it's not as buzzworthy as AI because okay, people like to think of this like evil Terminator AI, the video gonna take over the world and the planet, right? But nobody's like Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is not an android walking around 2 feet taking over the planet, right? So people actually don't like to talk about Bitcoin. And for so long, people thought that Bitcoin was a Ponzi scheme, right? No one ever thought that AI was a Ponzi scheme. So the video always catches the headlines. But look at MicroStrategy stock. Look at the best performing stock on the in the human universe, over 3x that of Nvidia, which is already impressive. And Nvidia is already destroying Tesla by a massive margin as well, right? So, I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? Even Donald Trump watches a Nashville presentation. He quotes Michael Saylor directly, says, "Never sell your Bitcoin." Apparently, Eric Trump, the son of Donald Trump, has known Michael Saylor for 20 years. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But if that's the case, I'm like 100% certain that, um, you know, Michael Saylor essentially has the left ear of Donald Trump. And yeah, it's a very good thing. So if you want to plug and create your own models, Google the Bitcoin 24 model. It's on GitHub. Plug in your own assumptions. And this is the big thing that I have my eyes set on. So currently, it's December, right? And everyone's waiting for the Trump to get into the office, January 20th. So this is the tricky thing. So I used to be super anti Donald Trump, right? Because I could care less about politics and stuff like that, right? And but when Donald Trump became super, super pro Bitcoin, I started to listen and start watching all his interviews and look at my Joe. Like honestly, I mean, I'm from the Bay Area, like liberal Democrat my whole life, right? And actually, I kind of realized, wow, the left leaning media is kind of they're kind of the evil ones here. And Donald Trump, he seems actually kind of like a cool, nice guy, right? And the big thought is there's not going to be a World War III, whatever, right? And Bitcoin under the Trump administration is going to explode in value. It's going to be the greatest 4 years of prosperity of all time. And this once again coming from like a super left leaning liberal. So this is a good thought. So, anyways, let us say America leads the charge in the crypto Bitcoin revolution, right? And yeah, I think assuming that America really wants to control the future, I think the America purchasing 6 million bitcoins is not totally out of this planet, right? So some thoughts on building personal family wealth. So the reason why I think this is kind of a big deal is that everyone wants to build wealth, right? Everyone wants to be intelligent with their investing. It doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit, a charity, a church, Mother Teresa, like every single organization will always need money, capital. If you have an endowment, for Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Brown University, whatever, even the UCs, right? Everyone needs money and capital, right? And I don't like to think too much about the macro because I'm not an institutional investor. I just think about myself, my family, my best friends, my squad, right? so the goal is building personal family wealth, and how to intelligently invest. So a lot of people talk about timings. Oh, when should I buy Bitcoin? Should I time it the high? Like, then people take out these charts and these candlesticks, which is all just witchcraft and pseudoscience. Don't follow any of that. Essentially, the thought is anytime is a good time to buy Bitcoin. If it's high, low, middle, whatever, we're gonna keep buying the top forever. So recently, I bought some more Bitcoin at $100,000, right? Then it dipped down to 90,000 to 88,000, hit 103,000 again. And so I'm pretty sure that in 10, 20 years, I'm gonna be buying Bitcoin at 1 million a Bitcoin, $10 million a Bitcoin, $55 million a Bitcoin, whatever's right. And because if you do the simple math, just think at least 4 years ahead, right? So if I could tell you with 100% certainty that Bitcoin is going to be 1.2 million a Bitcoin in 4 years, as long as you're buying it for less than $1 million a coin, you're going to be in the green. Like it's kind of a good bet, right? And actually, also ironically, my personal thought is chasing gains is a good thing, but also it's a good idea to not get quote quote greedy in the sense of maximizing your gains. So for example, right? Like what's the difference between getting a 38% yield and a 32% yield? Like the difference is nominal. Don't worry so much about maximization because even a lot of what I thought my trades were bad 2 years ago ended up being right. So as investors, we have to think at least 4, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ahead of us. So don't worry so much about the short term. So practical and pragmatic investing strategies, right? So once again, so okay, if I had a simple blueprint. So uh some simple thoughts. There's lots of different blends you could do this. You could be super simple, just 100% to Bitcoin, buy it on Coinbase, what is, right? And just keep stacking it forever. 100% legitimate. That's the Bitcoin maximalist approach, the triple maxi, the triple maximalist approach. If you just need to pay the bills, whatevs, and still stack the Bitcoins, my personal suggestion is put 80% of your wealth into Bitcoin and 20% of your wealth into MicroStrategy, MSTR stock. And once again, this is what you do. So let's say for simplicity of math, um, let's say you have $1 million or $100,000, or you use whatever kind of number you want, right? So put 20% of that to MicroStrategy stock. Whenever it goes up beyond the principal, sell some of that stock and put that into MicroStrategies. Put that into Bitcoin, and or use that money to just pay your bills. So once again, what I personally did, right? $150,000 working capital into MicroStrategy MSTR stock. And let's say when it goes from worth $150,000 to $160,000, I'll sell $10,000 worth of that stock. That $10,000 gets deposited into my checking account, which is linked to my Coinbase. Then I'll just buy $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, right? Or if you need that $10,000 for living expenses, let's say you need $3,000 to pay your rent. You take $3,000 of that to pay your rent, and you put the other 7% of that into Bitcoin. Um, Also, some other definition. What's the difference between being an investor, a trader versus a speculator? So an investor, we want to be investors. We want to think about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead of us. A trader is a bunch of these like 20-year-old high testosterone degenerates, single, maybe addicted to drugs or whatever, right? Who just want to like look cool. It's like, I made $1 billion in a month by using all these complicated statistical models, blah blah, right? But you don't want to be a trader because essentially it's nobody could time the market, not even God could time the market, right? And what a speculator is, people who invest in meme coins. So a meme coin is like buying a Dogecoin or a Shiba Inu. The reason why these are not, you should not do this, is that it is extremely dangerous. You're going to lose all your money, and it requires a charismatic leader to support it. So Dogecoin, right? Dogecoin is essentially Elon Musk coin, right? But if one day Elon Musk tweets, ha ha ha, Doge was just a joke all along, right? It's not worth anything, the value of it will plummet to zero. Or if once again Elon dies in a robo taxi accident, the value of Dogecoin is going to go to zero. Whereas if Elon Musk dies, Bitcoin's gonna still keep going up forever. So speculator is meme coins beyond Bitcoin. Us Bitcoiners, we're investors. So somebody also asked about monetary inflation, right? So there's this thing called the M2 monetary supply of the rate inflation. And once again, you're going to have to exceed at least 13% to 15% to not lose money. So for example, let us say you have $1 billion of US dollars in your checking account, right? You're going to be bled to death, right? So in a year, your $1 billion is going to shrink to 750 million, down to 500 million, to 350 million. And essentially, you're going to get a point where your money is worthless. And already we see this right now. So currently, the price of real estate, single family homes is exploding. But this is my critical view. How much of that is that the value of a single family house is higher versus our US dollars are just simply worthless, right? So if you just do the simple maths, right? So let us say that minimum wage goes from $15 an hour to $20 an hour overnight for a McDonald's worker, right? That means instantly you see 25% inflation. So your $1 million in the bank is now worth only $750,000. So yeah, once again, the real rich people, they store less than 1% of their wealth in US dollars in their checking account. Like, you're not gonna have Jeff Bezos bragging to other people that he has $10 billion of US dollars in their checking account. No, it's all gonna be in um, stocks or real estate, and actually ideally Bitcoin, cyber capital. So yeah, that's essentially the end